Welcome everybody to the Family Biz Show. My name is Michael Palumbos from Family Wealth and Legacy here in Rochester, New York, where we actually have a little bit of sun. It's one of the 7 days we're allotted. I want to welcome everybody. Today, we are going to be talking about the psychological and practical pitfalls in family business transitions. And we have two incredible guests with us today, Renee Fellman and Stephen Rolfe. Welcome, both of you.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you very much.
Glad that you are here. As we dive into this conversation, and before we dive into this conversation, rather, one of the traditions that we have on the show is we just ask people to tell us about your journey. How did you end up where you're engaged with family businesses? 20 years ago, that wasn't even a career path. Today, there's actually courses and whatnot at universities that are teaching, some of those, frameworks and whatnot. So Renee, why don't you kick us off? Tell us about what you do and about your journey.
So my journey, I think by any definition has been circuitous. So my undergraduate degree from Northwestern is in history. After I graduated, I taught 8th grade for 4 years. Trust me, Michael, if you can handle 8th graders, you can handle anything. At the ripe old age of 30, I was the first woman elected to the City Council of Beaverton, Oregon. 2 years later, at 32, I was elected mayor. In the same election, however, there was a charter change. And the position to which I had been elected was abolished. The form of government was changed, and I didn't want the new position. So I ended up running the campaign for the guy who was the first to be elected. Then I went back to get my MBA. And while I was in my MBA program, there was a woman in the program the guy she was living with led hospital turnarounds. And as soon as I heard about turnarounds, I knew that's what I wanted to do. I mean, think about it. Anyone who teaches 8th grade is a challenge junkie. And so when after I got out of my program, at that time, you were talking about family business not being a thing. Turnarounds weren't really a thing. This is 1986.
Sure.
And so I told people, I'm looking for a company that needs an organizer. And they had seen me organize everything from the PTC rummage sale to the neighborhood effort to fight City Hall to running political campaigns. So it only took me 3 months to get my first project. And actually, my first 3 clients were family-owned businesses. So at this point, I've been leading turnaround since 1986. I was the first woman to win the Turnaround of the Year award from the International Turnaround Management Association for my turnaround of a publicly held but family controlled company, the 3rd largest supplier of culture media in North America. And about 2/3 of my clients have been family-owned businesses. I've been an outside consultant for 12 and actually served as interim CEO for 11 family-owned businesses. Nice. So I am a doctor to sick businesses. The thing I want you to understand is I'm never on the preventive side. I can tell you, I can tell you the problems that have been caused by transition mistakes.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah,
and
thank
welcome. You. Stephen.
So my background is equally circuitous, but a different circuit. I'm trained originally, I'm trained as a physician, a psychiatrist, and a psychoanalyst. And earlier in my career, I worked with 8th graders as well.
Really?
I was the director of an inpatient psychiatric facility for children for many years and founded a number of inpatient children's units and adolescent units. And it was really partly by working in the psychiatric facility that I became interested in organizations, how organizations work, how organizations function, because it was a time of downsizing. because managed care had come into healthcare, we were faced with a situation where we were having shorter and shorter lengths of stays with more and more difficult patients. And it created a lot of challenges for the staff, who were very committed and had worked in a situation of long-term care with chronically ill children, to overnight having to treat kids for very brief lengths of stay. And with limited resources, it really became a challenge as to how to keep up the staff morale. So I became very interested in organizational work. On the other side, I had a private practice, and I was seeing a lot of entrepreneurs, CEOs, and family business owners in my private practice. And more and more was noticing, especially with the family business owners, how I would bring the families of the business owners into therapy, because I was trained as a family therapist as well. And more and more I began to see that a lot of the problems that the business owners were coming to see me with were connected to their businesses and were inseparable from their businesses. So I became more interested in family businesses from that perspective, and decided to pursue some advanced training in family business advising through Family Firm Institute. And from that time forward, I developed a practice that consists of consulting and advising CEOs, entrepreneurs, and family business owners on anything really having to do with psychological aspects of management, leadership, addressing conflict, and any leadership challenges they have, many of which have to do with transitions and succession planning. I've also focused my practice on working with leaders who are facing a personal life crisis or health crisis, and how that's impacting their organizations.
Great. Today we're talking about the pitfalls and some of the mistakes that families make, and that's where we're going to spend the bulk of our time. But Stephen, you said something that I just want to make sure, I'd like you to share. When you were in private practice, dealing with entrepreneurs and family business owners, if you had to categorize the top 3 or 4 things that were common for people to come in and want to talk about, how would you group those? What would you say those are?
I would say they have to do with anxiety over being in a leadership position. No one's prepared to take on a leadership position to the degree to which they have to lead. And you can educate people and you can try to prepare, but until they're actually in the role of having the kind of responsibility that leaders have, whether a family business or non-family business, the phrase "it's lonely at the top" it really rings true, and it rings true to a lot of people. So I would say that you see primarily anxiety. It's manifest in terms of anxiety, uncertainty, self-doubt. How did I get here? Am I really supposed to be here? There's sometimes feelings of impostrature. That's very common feeling. And that's on the CEO side of the business. I would say with the entrepreneurs, there's certainly anxiety, but you also see frequently depression. Because so many startups fail, such a high percentage fail, we, of course, only hear and see the successes. There's tremendous pressure on the entrepreneur to succeed, and tremendous stress associated with that, as well as depressive feelings when it looks like it really may not work out.
Sure. So you were dealing in the VUCA world long before it was a thing, huh?
Right.
Renee, why don't you kick us off talking about these transition mistakes or pitfalls? You are the transition person. You're the rescue person. So you've seen these mistakes and the pitfalls. Would you mind just, let's, and Steve, I want to say thank you, because the reason why I asked you for that, and I apologize, I miss saying this, is that I want people to know that they're not alone. Those things are very common. Anxiety and the pressure and dealing with uncertainty, that's normal part of being in a family business or being an entrepreneur or being a CEO. And so I just wanted to make that real. I wanted to normalize that a little bit for people, just to let them know that they're not alone. The same thing when it comes to these transition pitfalls and whatnot. You've seen so many of these, Renee, that I want people to be aware of what's happening.
Well, in terms of mistakes, where to start? So Steve had actually, in our correspondence, had sent an email saying one of the problems is that people just don't plan for it at all. I actually yesterday was just interviewed for a turnaround project. The CEO of the company, his parents died within a year of each other, and at age 18, with no college and no training, became the CEO. This guy has no idea about how to run a company. He happens to be extremely talented on the product side. So obviously that's one. I've had several situations like that where there was just zero planning. What if something happens to whoever's running the company?
Yeah. And on that note, it's so important, right? Because we always think it's going to happen to somebody else. It's never going to happen to me. It only happens, to other people. So,
right.
Yeah. So number one is lack of planning.
Yeah. Planning, failing to plan is planning to fail.
Okay.
Another is, I would say, picking the wrong successor. And I'd actually be interested in knowing what Steve thinks about this. I have had several situations in which the son of the founder ends up running the company, and the sons are under assertive. My theory, in some cases I've known the father and some not. My theory about that has been that you have a very assertive father, and the sons do this to please them. Sometimes they don't really want to do it. And remember, I only see the failures. I don't see the successes. And often they really don't have the skill set. Another is, it really has to do, another thing that happens is sometimes the founder picks a successor. I had a third generation owned packaging company. And the founder decided that his granddaughter should run the company. She always assumed she would be running the company. When I got there, she was not. Actually, no one was running the company when I got there. But again, just because she was cute and lively didn't mean that she would be the right person to run the company. And so one of the issues, I think, is that companies do not step back to think about what are the qualifications to run a company. And if we can talk about that a little more. Another is that people have gotten bad advice from their advisors. What
I throw into that one, Renee, is you don't know what you don't know. And so we trusted these advisors to get us to where we are, but those advisors may not be able to get us where we need to go.
Yeah. And so, for example, in 2016, I had a second generation family owned business, and the founder had two sons, and one of them was running the company. Neither son was qualified nor able really to run the company. And he told me, he said, I knew I was making a mistake, but everybody told me I had to turn over the reins. Well, it may be true that it was time to turn over the reins, but probably to some non-family member. That's another thing I've seen. Another one is there is a lot of the companies never changed the way they did things. The third generation family-owned business I described, they were doing things exactly the way the grandfather had done them. And you know what? Things had changed. So those are
Great.
well, yeah. Those are some of the things.
Yeah, no, those are wonderful. And it's funny. I was just talking with a family that's coming on the show in a future episode, and they talked about their ability to change through the years dramatically, and that was what made them successful. So they're going into their fifth generation. They just touched a member of the fifth generation just started working there. And, if they were still trying to do what the great-great-grandfather did, he was in the recycling business of recycling rags. Guess what? That's not an industry that even exists any longer. And so, and Renee, I think you'll appreciate this. We always talk with clients to say, when's the last time you did a SWOT analysis with the Mini Max? And they're like, what the heck is that? I mean, well, SWOT, this, the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. But then you have to, on top of doing the SWOT, you do the Mini Max. How do I minimize the threats and weaknesses, and how do I maximize the opportunities and strengths? And if you're focused on those pieces, right, that it probably helps to go back to like what you said, Steve. I'm dealing with the VUCA, I'm dealing with uncertainty, I'm dealing with change. But if I have that, if I'm thinking forward, I might be able to see things in the, coming at me that I might not have thought about without an exercise like a SWOT analysis. And I'm sure you probably take them to the nth degree, right?
My process is actually a little different, but that's a separate topic.
Okay. So, Steve, when you talk about pitfalls and the mistakes that families make during transitions, is there anything you'd like to add to what Renee was saying?
Yeah, I think Renee outlined a lot of the significant pitfalls fairly well. I would drill down on some of them, but first I want to underline her main comment of failure to plan is planning to fail. I don't know where that phrase originally came from, but it's certainly appropriate. And I think a lot of the difficulties really fall under that rubric, really, as well as a failure or a problem with asking the difficult questions and facing the difficult questions in terms of what does the transition or what does a succession plan really entail, and what does it really mean, and what does it really mean to the family. So, when we talk about planning for these transitions, we talk about both contingency plans and succession plans. And of course, the contingency plan was what you were referring to before, Michael, a sudden change when Jamie Dimon gets hit by the bus, which of course actually happened, as we know, recently when he, I think he had a aortic aneurysm that he miraculously survived, but he had an entire plan in place,
right?
And it exactly what was going to happen all during the time that he was ill, and so, but few family businesses in particular do have those. They don't have those plans in place. And so the kinds of stories that Renee was mentioning about children having to take over a business suddenly, even the children who are in the businesses. They're not really prepared. They're prepared to work in the business, but they're not prepared to run the business, even if they've been in the business for, many years. Along with that, I mean, there are many things involved with this question about planning. One, of course, maybe the most important is who does the planning, and how does that process occur? Because that gets into the whole question about governance and the whole question about having a board of directors, a meaningful board of directors or board of advisors, and how much does the founder use a board of advisors and rely on a board of advisors, particularly when there's a question about what the contingency or succession plan should be. And one example I think that fits with what Renee was bringing up, and when you talk about the question about a successor, yes, sometimes there's pressure to pick a child who may not really want to be in the business, right? And they feel this tremendous sense of obligation, and have difficulty saying that they don't want to do it. They want to go in another direction. They want to do something different. I mean, that's a dynamic that you see frequently. Another dynamic that you see, and this may be actually more common in non-family businesses, but I think it also occurs in family businesses, a kind of confirmation bias, in the sense that the CEO, either consciously or unconsciously, picks someone just like him or herself.
Right.
Where the business, as you were saying, Michael, the needs of the business may really be quite different for what's necessary in the future, but because of that bias of picking someone to resemble oneself, and that's where, of course, the advisory board or...
Well, Steve, I'm going to cut you off for just a second, because we're going to talk about those tools and techniques in a second.
Sure.
And some of the ways to get out there. But what you started to allude to are some of the typical causes of these mistakes that Renee brought out. Renee, why don't you jump in and just, if you can add to what else do you see as some of the common mistakes or the causes, and maybe then we'll go back and forth on how to prevent them.
It's good. No, frankly, as I'm talking, it's just been delightful. And I want to thank you. I really wouldn't have known Steve had you not invited us to be here. And his perspectives, I guess, have enhanced some of the things that I have seen and felt. And so it's been really interesting for me. And I hope the people attending will have the same experience. As he was talking, I guess, when you're talking about trying to pick a successor who's just like the founder, I think sometimes when people are getting ready to pick the successor, they see the problems of the founder. And so they try to pick somebody who's different instead of stepping back and thinking, what do we need? So that's one. Another issue that I have seen is that sometimes the culture of the family becomes the culture of the business. And of course, depending on whether it's a family that's super nice or a family that's super combative, that can happen. But for example, in my turnaround of the year, these people were there is no one nicer than this family. And they had operations in the US and Canada. And if you were a nice person, you could work at the company. There was
that fit their culture.
There was absolutely no accountability, no confrontation, and so that's another thing. I've also, as we've been talking, I've been thinking about how I'm sort of focusing on what's different, what the problems are in family businesses as opposed to non-family businesses. Some years ago, I had an employee-owned company, and I thought, well, this will be great. You know, everyone will be on the same track. It'll be so much easier than a family business. Wrong. Every employee is a member of the family, but you don't have the issue of the culture of the family becoming the culture of the business, and that's a difference. Another thing when we're talking about failing to plan is planning to fail, and this actually goes across all companies. Not one of my clients has had a business plan.
Really?
I have had 38 separate clients. Not one has had a plan. You know, I've worked with companies with revenues ranging from $1 million a year to over 200 million a year. Not one has had a business plan. I don't think they know what a business plan is. And we may want to talk about that later, but that's
100%.
another issue. Another is the new CEO or president comes in, and there is no established way of evaluating that person's performance. And that can be an issue if it is a family member, or even if it is even if it's a non-family member CEO.
Great. You know, we talk about, I think, you know, what you alluded to, and Renee, I'm just kind of taking some of the things that you said. And Steve, I think at the end of the day that a lot of the mistakes, and tell me, you know, feel free to take my words and mesh them however you need them to be. But a lot of the mistakes and the causes probably come from the internal biases, the psychological side of what we're thinking. Would you agree with that, that you've seen some things like that? Or how would you expand upon that? Maybe make that come out better.
Well, you know, it may be that everyone can't do everything, and it may be that the personality characteristics that lead someone to, you know, found and run a company are different from the, you know, from the personality characteristics that lead one to say, well, it's you know, that they want to become essentially a mentor or an educator, or want to think about, you know, spend time thinking about what's going to, you know, happen with this business, or what's going to happen in the next generation. Or they may be people that are prone towards action rather than reflection, you know, and they may be focused, you know, much more on what to do with the business next. They don't really want to think too much about the messiness of the interpersonal challenges that are associated with planning for, you know, for the next generation. And you know, would like to just leave that for someone else or for another day.
You know, a lot of times I think, go ahead, Renee.
Well, you brought up the issue of unconscious bias, and Steve will know much more about the whys and maybe how to fix it. But we all see things through the lens of our DNA and our personal experiences. Mm-hmm. And that's true of everyone. And so one of the issues that I have seen, and sometimes actually say in family businesses, is we're all sitting in the same theater, but we're seeing a different movie. And I think that is another source of problems. In terms of unconscious bias, personally, I wish that there would be more attention focused on this in business in general. Several years ago, I read Sheryl Sandberg's book, and she was really talking about women in business, but she cited a case study that was done in the Harvard Business School where I want to give you an exact, I hope sorry if I go this way, it's a little.
I love it.
Okay, so there was a case study, and they divided this MBA class into two groups. Both groups had men and women in them. They had two identical case studies, except in one case study, the manager was a woman. In the other case study, the manager was a male. And both groups, even though the facts were the same, both groups saw the men and the woman differently. And I like to think of myself as being very objective, right? So fast forward a few months later, I'm at a meeting, a business meeting, and I'm sitting next to a board member and this woman from some Canadian company. And I spend all my time talking to him. Guess who the CEO of the company is? The woman who I didn't even talk to. So I think that we all have that and don't realize it. And it's a bigger factor than people realize, I think.
I think that's really, really, really important. And Steve, you started to talk about, the boards or the advisory board earlier. And I think that's kind of, if you had to, between the two of you, what is the role of the board, in your opinions, for the families?
I do want to get to that, Michael, very important, but I just don't want to leave this thought because I think it's important to mention back to your previous question. It's very difficult to, think about the difficulty of running and being in a family business. It is a real, I think it's important not to lose sight of, there are clearly tremendous advantages to having a family business. And we talk about patient capital and not having to manage quarter to quarter and that kind of thing. But it is a real challenge, and there are very few families that can pull it off. So we should recognize that, and we should realize that, when we think about, what are, because it takes an enormous amount of strength, a certain kind of strength and certain kind of ability to do this. But at the same time, there are these family businesses or that stay in business for the wrong reason, right? They stay in business together to keep the family together, what we were talking about before, and not allow autonomy, right? I see this frequently. I do some coaching of at the Wharton School with young, MBAs who are coming from legacy family businesses. And they are always in turmoil about whether they're going to use their MBA education to return to the legacy business or go off on their own and do something quite different.
Yeah. You're saying that. I just want to make a point to the audience real quick. I think it's really important. I have found, not all, but many coaches or advisors to family business, they really, really push that legacy piece and put a lot. I think there's added pressure coming from the outside, and there's enough pressure coming from the inside to maintain that family business, to not be the generation that loses it. And there's this piece there that's really tough. And so I make sure, and I want people to realize, whether you're first, second, third, 10th generation, it doesn't matter. Be willing to sell the business at any time. There comes a point where it's that the business isn't what's important. It's the family that's important. So make sure that you're balancing that family and business aspect. And sometimes, we always talk about the business that's a lifestyle business that's run by the family. And they're making decisions based on the family. Ooh, Junior got divorced. He's going to need some extra money to help pay alimony. Versus, this other thought of the business is just, it's so big, it's complicated. There's 250 employees in here now, and we really don't have anybody there to do it. And we don't want to bring somebody from the outside. Great. Then now it's time to think about selling. And that it can also be considered success, but you just have to get your mind wrapped around it. Is that?
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And when we talk about pitfalls, that's probably that's one of the biggest pitfalls, right? And it's said that the biggest loss of value across across the country is the failure to sell a business at the right time.
Right. Oh,
And if you
great.
add up
Say that one more time, because I want people to hear that.
the biggest loss of value, if you add up the loss of value, points to businesses that don't sell at the right time. And if you think about Yellow Cab and how much those medallions used to be worth before Uber came along. So, and I also agree, Michael, with what you said before, that I have to say that the field of family business advising was part of that problem, because the focus has been so much on succession planning and planning for the next generation, as if that's what absolutely should happen that defines a successful transition. A Canadian, I think his name's Tom Deans, wrote a book called Everyone's Family Business. It's a widely read book, and he really makes the point that you were making, that it's really important that it's not the family business that's important to transition to the next generation, but think of it more like you're a business family, and what that business is, or the knowledge that you're transferring, so that the next generation can do something different as far as business, is how to define the success. And so for him, of course, he was the fourth generation, and his business was consulting to family businesses. And that was the iteration of how his family business evolved. So I think it's very important.
I appreciate that. And as a quick side note, for those of you that attend our book clubs, Tom Dean's book is the one that we're doing in September. So thank you.
Okay, good.
Highly recommend that book as well. I just find this conversation can go in so many different directions, and I really appreciate what both of you bring to the table. I want to start talking about some of the tools and some of the, Renee, one of the things that you said is there's no accountability. And so I would love, to me, that's one of those tools. How do you implement accountability inside of an organization? What are some of the things that you do to ensure those things?
So the first thing goes back to what I was talking about, having a plan. First of all, when I get into these situations, it's like my patients, I'm a doctor, my patients are in the emergency room. That means I've got to diagnose the problem and begin treatment immediately. And I'm not talking about months, I'm talking about days. Sometimes they have no cash. They can't get vendors to ship with them. Most of them are in dire straits. And so the first thing I do is interview the key managers, but I also get permission. It's actually in my engagement letter that I can conduct an absolutely confidential employee survey. And that means unless an employee says, yes, you can share what I'm saying, only Renee knows. And I find out all sorts of stuff that is incredibly valuable. Then, and this usually happens either the first or second Saturday that I'm there, I bring together the management team, and we go through the financial statements line item by line item. And we ask, how can we get more cash, increase revenues, and decrease costs? And the advantage of, first of all, most of the time, these people almost always, they know there's a big problem, but they don't know, haven't seen the numbers. And so as we go through, it's possible to develop a plan that is very realistic, because let's say the VP of marketing and sales says, we could sell blah, 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 this much of this product. And manufacturing says, I wish we could, but we just don't have the capacity. But we could make more of these. Could you sell those? So I just use that as an example. When all of the key managers are sitting in the room together, the interrelationships among the various functions of the company come into play. Out of that comes a plan. So it's a real plan, and it's in writing. It's not a tome, it's bullet points. It has a chart. This comes to the accountability piece that shows who, an Excel spreadsheet, who is responsible for doing what when. And of course, they've made these commitments in front of all their fellow managers. And then financial projections that are the numeric representation of the plan. This really becomes the foundation of a system for ensuring accountability. For me, or whoever the CEO, when I'm actually serving as CEO, or whoever the CEO is, it's a way of holding the managers accountable. For the board, it gives them a way to hold me, if I'm running the company, or whoever's running the CEO, to see whether or not they're on track. So that's part of it.
I'm gonna pause for just a second, because I want to make sure that people understand that one of the ways to make sure that Renee's not knocking on your door and that you're calling Renee up is to put a business plan together. And the way that a business plan is put together is getting the leadership team across silos, so that we're not siloed and we're not myopic and we're seeing all things, and getting a plan in place, folks. It's really, really not that difficult. Whether you want to just do it yourself, then read the book Scaling Up, or read Good to Great, or read some of these other books that are out there to learn how to do these things. But if not, in the absence of that, if you're typically not comfortable doing that, then bring in a business coach to help you get a plan in place. And Renee, the other thing that you said that I like these points, that financial statement, if you're not looking at your cash conversion cycle and looking at ways that you can shorten duration times, that you can move inventory faster, not hold as much, get things off of the, shorten the amount of cash, shorten the time that it takes for cash to run through your business, cash sucks growth. And it really is the number one thing. What do they say? Revenue is vanity, profit is sanity, but cash is king or queen. So thank you, Renee.
Yeah, I actually see it somewhat. So the thing about the plan that I would say is you've got to have the right people. And that means that the people who, if you're talking about establishing accountability, it's important to have people who have the right skill set. And one of the biggest mistakes that I have seen, and I've ended up having to replace people, is that often when companies are hiring, they look for experience instead of results. I'll give you an example. So I started at a new client in dire straits, and the CEO said, "We have a great new CFO. He has experience in turnarounds." I said, "That's great. Tell me about him." "Well, he went to company A." I said, "Well, how are they doing?" "Oh, they went out of business." Then he went to company B. I said, "Well, and how are they doing?" "Oh, they went out of business." Well, you will not be surprised to learn that this guy was one of the first people I let go. He couldn't even get financial statements out. And this was a sizable company.
Right.
So part of it is another part of accountability is you've got to have the right people.
Right people, right seats, doing the right things.
Yeah. Another piece is, and I was thinking about this as you were talking about cash and cash conversion cycle, and financial management is in fact critical, no doubt about it. But in my experience, what appear to be financial problems are often really operational problems. And so looking at the people and the processes and the systems and fixing those can make a huge difference in the bottom line. And we definitely don't have time to get into that today.
Right.
So then the other piece, though, in terms of accountability, and the thing I see missing often is it is critical for companies to think about literally to list what are the critical functions in our company, and have we assigned a specific person? Is it in somebody's job description that person has the responsibility and the authority to do that job? I had my turnaround of the year was FDA regulated. They made culture media. They were having product contamination problems. They had dings from the FDA. So one of the first things I did was, and this company had a beautiful organization chart. I sat down with the director of quality assurance and the director of governmental affairs. I said, which one of you is in charge of FDA compliance? Which one do you think was in charge?
Neither.
Either one. It wasn't in anyone's job description.
Right.
So that is another really important piece. But then last but not least, when you've got this plan, then I think you asked before, what's the job of the board? In my view, any company, the job of the board of directors is to hold the CEO accountable.
That's it. I love it. Yeah. And then the simplified version of what you said about the process, and I totally agree. The process accountability chart. Everybody's, like you said, they all got their the org chart, but where is the process accountability chart? How do we know who's doing the things inside of a company so that we're not missing important processes? That's super.
Yeah, and I guess sort of on a related, and would be interesting to know what Steve thinks about this. Remember, I only work with troubled companies, so I don't. In my experience, I would say only about 20% of the people actually get operations.
Yeah.
And it's really critical for companies to have people who are strong in operations, and that's another piece I frequently see missing.
Love it.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Steve.
I was going to say, well, I only work with troubled companies also, but but the troubled companies I work with also have, many, many things that obviously that are going quite well, and that they're doing quite well for sure. But I think back to the issue of the accountability as far as family businesses are concerned, because I think that introduces, several significant wrinkles, obviously, and some of which you alluded to, Renee, before, which is that, how do you deal with a problematic family member? You can have, we talk about best practices and we talk about a family employment policy and things like that. But of course, those are only as good as they're used. And it's not easy. It's not easy. We talk about best practices, but it's not easy to always, be able to, you do the families, I think they do the best they can, really try to hold family members like everyone else accountable in the same way. But it is a challenge to be able to do that, and to help leaders of family businesses, as well as some of the family who's employed, to recognize, that it may not be the best place for them to be in the family business. And one small thing that actually not so small, but just the policy of making sure that family members work outside the business before they come into the family business. I think that's a pretty well accepted tenet by most people now. But there are exceptions to that. There are definitely exceptions to that, and sometimes it has worked out for the better. Really, sometimes that business may not have read the book. But it has actually worked out because it gave a family member, for example, in one situation I'm thinking of, it gave a family member the opportunity to work with the founder that they otherwise would not have had, as it turned out. So, none of these things are absolute, but in general, obviously, having people work outside the business before they enter the business. And I think most families now, most family business, mature family business, certainly have that in as part of their governance.
Sure. You were talking about the MBA students that you've worked with and at Wharton, and I just want to, I think that falls perfectly in place. I mean, with somebody, and I don't know if it was you or Renee, talking about the family culture and the business culture. And so one of the things that I try to teach is that family culture should be about the pursuit of happiness, right? For each family member to be happy, for each family member to, obtain their best and, most productive self in their role. That may or may not be in the family business. And so if it's not a tenet, if it's not a culture of the family business, and I know families that I've worked with where the culture is, it's almost shamed upon if you're not part of the family business. And so it's changing that culture, just like it's the shame of you're the one that, didn't the business sold during your tenure, or you weren't able to, do the transition to the next generation properly. And I think there's just some thinking around these areas. Not, we're all in America here, and it's, what is the pursuit of happiness is, one of the things on the come on, my brain is just doing the Declaration of Independence, right? And so why not putting that into our families and making what is the family's declaration of happiness and culture? I think that's probably an important thing to put together. What else? We're coming up on the top of the hour, and we can go, go a little bit more. What do you, through this conversation, there's probably notes or things that you said, oh, I don't want to forget about this. What are those things for you that you want to make sure that we don't miss in this conversation?
Well, just to underline what we were saying before about the value of the board and the board of advisors, and really getting to the point of professionalizing the family business, it should make it a lot easier for the founder to make some difficult decisions. Now, it's not always easy for the founder to want to agree to some of these structures, and sometimes it makes sense and sometimes it doesn't. But I really try to get the founders to the point where they look upon transitions and look upon succession planning and try to say, you have to approach this the way you would every other business decision you have ever made. That you really and not treat it differently, and oftentimes having the objectivity of a sounding of the board of advisors is really is really critical to helping founders and CEOs make what are otherwise really difficult decisions in terms of who's the right person to succeed, and whether they do have the right qualities and qualification. That's in the realm of management succession. And then there's also the question of ownership succession, which we really haven't talked a lot about in terms of pitfalls, because that's another area where so many situations, there's so many times where, in a desire to be, quote, fair to the children, the next generation is saddled with siblings who, one or two of whom are running the business and the other six of whom are not, and that are out of the business completely. And that sets up a significant conflict in terms of liquidity and dividends, and what kind of control the family members that are not in the business have. So I working recently with an entrepreneur, with a founder, and he described what the transition for him was like when he took the business over from his father, and they worked together for many years together seamlessly, and they didn't even have to think about these issues at all. It was completely natural. He was completely prepared. But it was a different world. It was a different situation. The demands of the business were obviously very, very different, and the complexities just were not what they are now, from a family as well as a business perspective.
Right. Steve, I'm going to send it over to Renee in just a second, but because just to wrap up, if people wanted to touch base with you, how do they do that? What's the best way to do that?
They can. My website is Rolfe, ROLFE advisory.com, or email me at srolfe@rolfeadvisory.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And Renee, I want to hear what your final wrap up would be about all of this. This has been such a great conversation. Thank you both.
No, it's really been fun. I want to follow up. I have many things I could say. You can probably tell I'm pretty, but on the advisor issue, one of my pet peeves is that succession planning and transition planning has been co-opted, I think, by the attorneys and the accountants. And don't get me wrong, they have important knowledge which needs to be a part of that process. The reality, however, is that most of those people have never run a business. And I think it is extremely important to have on the planning team people with a variety of skills who see things from a variety of perspectives, and definitely people who will tell it like it is. When you've got a professional advisor, they may be reluctant to alienate their client by saying, don't do that. So that's what I would say. In terms of reaching me, it would be reneefellman.com, which is RENEE Fellman, F as in Frank, ELLMAN.com.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. And you know what?
We're on LinkedIn for that matter.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, that's right. That's a perfect way to do it. And I think it's definitely worth checking out Renee's website. She's got an incredible picture with this gigantic, I think it's a hammer, correct? Did
It's
I get
a
that
wrench.
Right? A wrench,
It's
a giant
wrench.
wrench. I don't think I've seen a wrench that big ever before. So
I know, it's from a former client.
it's great. It sticks in your mind. Folks, you have been blessed to listen to some really great advice from people that have been in the trenches working with other family businesses today. Stephen, Renee, I just want to say thank you very, very much. This has been a great conversation. I know that there will come a time, in the future when I have you both back again, whether it's together or separately, because I know we could do this for probably about 4 hours without stopping. And I've really enjoyed the conversation. I hope everybody has understood how powerful the messages that you've heard today are. Thank you for joining us. My name, again, is Michael Palumbos. I'm with Family Wealth and Legacy in Rochester, New York. And if you've loved this episode, do us a favor, make sure that you hit the like button or hit the 5-star review or subscribe to the channel so that when we have a new episode coming down, it can just drop right down into your podcast system for you. And then the other thing is, make sure you share this with others that are in the family business. I know we're a small community. We know other family businesses. It may not be this episode that sparks something for somebody else, but if they know about the podcast, then we can help them. Join us on our next episode, and we look forward to seeing everybody again. Have a great day, everybody.